In the small town of Millbrook Hollow, Vermont, tucked between rolling green hills and a winding creek called Miller's Run, there lived a 10-year-old boy named Eli Hutchins. Eli had messy brown hair, a gap between his front teeth, and a habit of asking questions that made grown-ups stop and scratch their heads. Eli lived with his grandfather, Walter Hutchins, on a 40-acre apple orchard that had been in the family for 3 generations. Everyone in town just called him Gramps Hutchins. He was 74 years old, with hands like old leather gloves and a limp in his left knee from a tractor accident 20 years back. The Hutchins orchard used to be the pride of Millbrook Hollow. Rows and rows of Honeycrisp and Macintosh apple trees stretched across the hillside, and every fall, families would drive from 3 counties over just to pick apples and drink fresh cider. But over the last few years, something had gone wrong. The trees still bloomed every spring, covered in soft pink and white blossoms, but fewer and fewer of those blossoms turned into apples. Have you ever wondered what it actually takes for a flower to become a fruit? It's not magic. It's not just sunshine and rain. It's pollination, and that means somebody, or something, has to carry pollen from one blossom to another. For generations, that job had been done quietly, for free, by wild bees living in the woods around the orchard. Nobody paid them any attention, nobody thought about them at all, until they started disappearing. Gramps didn't know exactly why. Maybe it was the pesticides drifting over from a neighboring farm. Maybe it was a harsh winter that killed off the wild hives. Maybe it was just bad luck, 3 years running. All he knew was that the orchard's harvest had dropped by almost half, and the bank letter sitting on the kitchen table said the farm was 3 months behind on its loan payments. Eli didn't fully understand what behind on payments meant, but he understood the look on his grandfather's face when he read that letter. It was the same look he'd had the day Eli's parents left him at the farm 4 years earlier, promising to come back for him once things settled down. They never had. Gramps had raised Eli ever since, and Eli loved him more than anyone else in the world. So when Eli overheard Gramps on the phone with the bank, saying words like extension and last chance, he decided he was going to do something about it. He just didn't know what, yet. The idea came to him on a Tuesday afternoon in April, at the town dump. Gramps had sent him along with old Mr. Featherstone, who ran the hardware store, to drop off a truckload of broken fence posts. While the men talked, Eli wandered around the edge of the dump and found something strange sitting behind a pile of scrap metal, 3 old wooden boxes, stacked crooked, grey with age, with strange little slats cut into the sides. "What are these?" Eli asked, poking one with a stick. Mr. Featherstone squinted over. "Beehives, son. Old Langstroth hives, from the looks of them. Somebody must have cleared out a bee yard and didn't want the boxes anymore. Why not? Bees died off in 'em, probably. Empty hives not worth much to most folks." Eli looked at the boxes for a long moment. They looked like nothing. Splintered wood, rusted nails, a few broken frames inside. But something about them made him curious. "Can I have them?" Mr. Featherstone laughed. "You can have the whole pile for all I care. Nobody's coming back for them." That evening, Eli and Gramps hauled the 3 old hive boxes home in the back of the pickup truck. When they unloaded them by the barn, Gramps ran his rough hand along the wood and got quiet for a minute. "Your great-grandfather used to keep bees," he said, "right here on this land, back before I was even your age. What happened to them?" "Time happened. Bees need tending, same as anything else alive. Nobody kept it up after he passed." Eli looked at the boxes, then out at the orchard, rows of blossoming trees with almost no bees buzzing among them. A thought clicked into place in his 10-year-old mind, the kind of thought that seems too big for a kid his age, but sometimes kids see things clearly, precisely because nobody's told them it's impossible yet. "What if I brought the bees back?" Gramps chuckled, not unkindly. "That's not exactly a weekend project, Eli." "I don't care. Can I try?" Gramps looked at his grandson for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "All right. But you're doing the research yourself. I'll help with my 2 hands, but this has to be your head doing the thinking." What would you have done if you were 10 years old and somebody told you that a rusted, empty box might just be your family's second chance? Eli got to work. He started at the Millbrook Hollow Library, which had exactly 2 books on beekeeping, both from the 1980s, and he read every page of both. He learned that a beehive isn't just a box, it's a whole city, built around a single queen bee who can lay up to 2,000 eggs a day during the busy season. He learned that worker bees, all of them female, do every job in the hive, nursing the young, building wax comb, guarding the entrance, and finally, in the last weeks of their short lives, flying out to gather nectar and pollen. He learned something else too, something that stuck with him. A single bee colony, when healthy, can visit millions of flowers in just a few weeks. And in an orchard like his grandfather's, that pollination isn't a nice bonus. It's the entire difference between a tree covered in blossoms and a tree covered in apples. Eli started spending every afternoon in the barn, cleaning out the old hive boxes. He scraped away old wax and mold with a putty knife. He replaced the rotted wooden frames with new ones he built himself, using scrap lumber and a handsaw, following diagrams he'd copied onto notebook paper. He sanded down the rough edges until his fingers were raw. He repainted the boxes white, the way the library book said would help keep them cool in summer. Word got around town fast, the way it does in a place where everybody knows everybody. Some folks thought it was sweet, a boy trying to help his grandfather, but plenty of others thought Eli was simply wasting his time. "Bees are dangerous," said Mrs. Callahan, who ran the general store, shaking her head. "That boy's going to get himself stung within an inch of his life." "Empty boxes and dead man's dreams," muttered old Hank Torres, who used to farm the land next door. "You can't just decide to become a beekeeper. Takes years to learn that trade. Even some of the kids at Eli's school teased him about it. Bee boy, they called him, laughing when he showed up smelling faintly of beeswax and pine. Eli heard all of it. And for a while it stung more than any bee could. But every evening he'd walk out to the barn, look at those 3 hive boxes sitting clean and freshly painted in the fading light, and think about his grandfather's face when he read that letter from the bank. And he'd keep working. By late April, the hives were ready, empty, but ready. Now Eli faced the hardest problem of all. How do you get bees into a box when you don't have any bees to begin with? The answer came from an unexpected place. Down at the county extension office, a beekeeping expert named Rosalind Meadows ran free classes for new beekeepers every spring. Eli's teacher, Ms. Aldridge, who'd noticed how seriously Eli had been taking his research, arranged for Gramps to drive him into town for one of her Saturday sessions. Rosalind Meadows was in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a braid, and forearms strong from decades of hauling hive boxes. When she saw Eli's careful notes and the photos of his rebuilt hives on his phone, she raised her eyebrows. "You did this yourself?" "Yes, ma'am." "How old are you?" 10. She was quiet for a moment, studying him, the way adults do when they're deciding whether to take a kid seriously. Then she smiled. "Well, Eli, I think I might be able to help you." She explained something called a bee swarm. When a hive gets overcrowded, roughly half the colony leaves with the old queen to find a new home, clustering together in a big buzzing ball, often hanging from a tree branch, while scout bees search for the perfect spot. Every spring, swarms show up in people's yards, and most folks just want them gone. Rosalind kept a list of swarm calls from worried homeowners, and instead of destroying the bees, she or a volunteer would safely capture them and rehome them. "You want to learn to catch a swarm?" she asked. Eli's eyes went wide. Yes. 2 weeks later, on a warm Saturday morning, Rosalind's phone rang. A swarm had settled on a low branch of a maple tree outside a farmhouse, 15 minutes from Millbrook Hollow. She called Gramps, and within the hour, Eli was standing beneath that maple tree in a borrowed bee suit 3 sizes too big, watching a golden-brown cluster of thousands of bees clinging to the branch like a living, humming teardrop. "Have you ever stood close to something that could hurt you and felt strangely calm instead of scared. That's exactly how Eli felt. Rosalind showed him how to hold a cardboard box beneath the branch, how to give the branch one firm, confident shake, and how the whole cluster of bees dropped almost as one, tumbling into the box below. She explained that swarming bees are usually gentle, because they have no hive to defend, no honey stores to protect, just a queen to keep safe, and a mission to find a new home. They drove the box, still humming softly, back to the Hutchins farm. As the sun dipped low over the orchard, Eli, with Rosalind guiding his hands, poured the bees gently into the first of his rebuilt hive boxes. He watched them crawl inside, fanning their wings at the entrance, releasing a scent that told any stragglers exactly where home now was. Gramps stood beside him, arms crossed, saying nothing for a long time. Finally, he put a hand on Eli's shoulder. "Your great-grandfather would be proud of you, son. Before we go further, if this story has you hooked so far, go ahead and tap that like button, hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, and drop a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from tonight." All right, back to Eli. The first weeks were the hardest. Eli learned quickly that keeping bees alive takes far more than putting them in a box and walking away. He learned to check the hive weekly, gently prying the lid open with a metal hive tool, watching for signs the queen was laying eggs in a healthy pattern. He learned to use a small metal smoker filled with smoldering pine needles to calm the bees before he worked, since the smoke masks the alarm scent guard bees release when they sense danger. He learned about a tiny but devastating pest called the varroa mite, a parasite that attaches to bees and can wipe out an entire colony if left unchecked. Rosalind taught him how to slide a white sticky board under the hive to count mites that fall, and how to treat the colony safely if the numbers climbed too high. There were setbacks. One hive nearly starved during a cold snap in early May, and Eli had to learn how to feed the colony a homemade sugar syrup until the flowers bloomed again. Another hive tried to swarm on its own just 6 weeks in, and Eli, following what he'd learned, had to split the colony into 2 separate boxes to relieve the overcrowding, which meant that what started as 3 hives became 4. Slowly, painfully, and with more mistakes than he could count, Eli became something rare, a genuine beekeeper. Not because he was gifted, because he refused to quit. By June, something remarkable started happening in the orchard. The apple trees, which had bloomed thin and quiet for 3 disappointing years, were suddenly alive with movement. Eli's bees, now numbering in the tens of thousands across 4 hives, fanned out across the orchard every morning, moving from blossom to blossom, leaving behind a dusting of golden pollen with every visit. Gramps noticed it first, while checking irrigation lines. "Eli," he called out one morning, his voice shaking slightly, "come look at this." The trees near the hives were thick with tiny green apples, more than either of them had seen in years. Where the bees worked hardest, closest to the hives, the fruit set was almost double what it had been the previous summer. Do you know what a 50% increase in fruit set means to a struggling family farm? It can mean the difference between selling enough apples to pay the bank or losing the land that's been in your family for 3 generations. By late summer, word had spread well beyond Millbrook Hollow. A 10-year-old boy who had rebuilt 3 broken hives from the town dump had somehow helped bring an entire family orchard back to life. The local newspaper ran a story with a photo of Eli standing proudly in his oversized bee suit, holding up a frame dripping with fresh golden honey. That first honey harvest produced 62 pounds of raw wildflower and apple blossom honey. Eli, with Gramps' help, filled small mason jars, hand-wrote labels that read, "Hutchins Family Honey," and set up a little stand at the end of their driveway. The jars sold out within 4 days. He used the money, every last dollar of it, toward that overdue tractor part Gramps desperately needed to keep the harvest equipment running. By fall, the Hutchins orchard produced its best apple crop in 5 years. The bank extension wasn't just granted, it became unnecessary, because for the first time in years, the farm turned a real profit. The kids who used to tease Eli started asking him questions instead. Mrs. Callahan bought 3 jars of his honey for her store shelves. Old Hank Torres, the neighbor who'd once called it an empty box and a dead man's dream, showed up one afternoon asking if Eli might help him start 2 hives of his own. Eli was happy to teach him everything he knew. Here's something worth sitting with. A single healthy beehive, properly managed, can pollinate an area of roughly 2 to 3 square miles. One farmer, keeping just a handful of hives, can transform not just their own harvest, but the harvests of every neighboring farm and garden within flying distance. That's not folklore. That's basic agricultural science, and it's exactly what unfolded in Millbrook Hollow. By the following spring, Eli had grown his apiary to 8 hives. He'd started keeping detailed records in a notebook Gramps bought him for his 11th birthday. Hive inspections, honey yields, mite counts, queen health, the same careful habits any real farmer relies on. Rosalind Meadows told him, only half joking, that he already knew more about practical beekeeping than some of the adults in her Saturday classes. Gramps still limped from his old tractor injury. He still worried about the weather, the way every farmer does. But the fear that used to sit behind his eyes when the bank's letters arrived was gone. In its place was something steadier, pride, mostly, and maybe a little bit of wonder, watching his grandson do what generations before him had quietly understood, that sometimes the smallest, most overlooked creatures carry the greatest responsibility for whether a farm lives or dies. If there's one thing worth remembering from Eli's story, it's this. Pollinators aren't decoration on a farm. They're infrastructure, every bit as essential as irrigation or soil health. A hive that looks like junk to one person might be exactly the tool another person needs to save everything they love. So here's a question worth asking yourself before you go. Is there something in your own life, something other people have written off as old, broken, or not worth the effort, that might actually be exactly what you need, if you're just willing to clean it up and give it a real chance? If this story meant something to you, make sure you're subscribed so you catch the next one. Tap that like button before you go, and don't forget to drop a comment below, letting us know where you're watching from tonight. We read every single one. Thanks for spending this time with us. We'll see you in the next story.